Hello, Retro MMO consumers. I hope you are all well today. Wanted to make this video to give a quick status update on the new game engine that I've been working on now that we're about 1 month in. If you didn't already see the video where I announced this engine and talked about why I'm doing this and all that, I'll put that in the top of the description for you. And the format for these is going to be not scripted and segmented like the old devlogs. I'm pretty much just going to casually run through, like, show the game on the screen, what's happening, and then after that we can go through some of the code stuff, what's going on behind the scenes for anybody that's interested. And on a side note, unrelated, I should mention that we are also currently celebrating RetroMMO's 1 year anniversary, the RetroMMO's first birthday of being a live, playable, released game. And there is an event going on in the game right now, which is what you're seeing gameplay of right now, so always, of course, welcome to log in and play that for anyone interested. But let's go ahead and get into this. Alright, so I have my dev server running on my computer now. I'll go ahead and open that in the browser. Just to run through all the features real quick, you can see we have the login screen. As soon as I do a click, interact with the page, it will start playing the title theme. We have registration and authentication working properly. I'll go ahead and log in with an account that I already created. You can see we have character select. We have the ability to delete characters. We have character creation, multiple classes. We have character customization where I can edit my colors and sprites here. We do already have the beginnings of the world scene. If I log into a character, you can see we have tile map rendering here. We have player movement. We have proper Z indexing with the ability to walk in front of and behind objects. We have emotes. If I click on my character, emote. We have the partying system as well. If I go ahead and log in a second character here, and this just works the same as before, of course. Click on another player, party, walk, and then they get a prompt, accept, and then we're moving around together, and as you can see, it shows your party on the bottom here, and you can click the X to break party. That about covers it for the feature set that we have so far in this new engine from the player perspective, and now I'd like to go behind the scenes and show you what we're doing here in the code, how this works under the hood. So I've got my terminal open here. I'm first just going to go through what is the script that runs when we build our application. That will be here in our package.json. You can see I have two separate scripts, dev and production, which are for, production is of course for the running the released game in production, and dev would be for when I'm working on the game, editing my code. These essentially do the same things, but with a little bit different settings, and then the dev script also reloads constantly when I make changes. That's the main difference. But I'll go ahead and run our production script. If I do npm run production, and I'll kind of show you what happens here step by step as this is running. But what we do here is we clear the console, just clears the terminal, gives it a fresh box to print everything. We run a sanity check, which is just a custom script that we've built, which checks that some certain things that you want to make sure are correct before the game server runs are correct. Like, for example, checking that a connection can be made to the database successfully, these sorts of things. We then run our linter, and then we run the build scripts. Inside of our build script, we copy all of the shared modules between the server and the client over to the client from the server. We create the directory that our code will be output to, the lib directory, and then we run the TypeScript compiler. And then for the client, we also run esbuild to bundle everything together into a single JavaScript file that can be served. After it's built, we do npm run start, which is very simple, just runs our entry point for the server using Node.js, which is, of course, what this server is built in. What I'd like to do next is start in our entry point here for the server and run through it piece by piece, just trace it all and talk about what's happening. Very first thing that happens in this application is that we set up our environment variables using the .env library. And then we run a function I've created called run, which I will go into here, functions guarded run.ts. Very first thing that we do is log that the application is running and log the version number, which we can see right here. Then we do some process listeners for error handling and for shutdown handling, which right now is pretty boilerplate and doesn't do so much custom, so I won't really talk about it. But here we get into some of the things that are actually pretty unique to my engine here, such as this define function. This is where I define all of the game data. For anybody familiar with how I was doing things in the last engine, I was actually doing all my data entry in JSON files and loading them in like that. But this time around, I am doing all the game data in TypeScript, just creating classes for them. Like, for example, what's one that we could look at? I'm not going to go through all these, of course, but like perhaps emotes. I go through and I say new emotes, and then I pass in a slug, and then whatever metadata this type of game data would have would be the rest of the args. Pretty much every piece of game data, really any sort of game object in this entire engine extends our definable class, which I really would like to touch on. But what this definable class gives us is a couple things. It automatically sets up a map for every single object that is instantiated from a class that extends definable. And it also has this slug behavior where it enforces unique identifiers for every single game object. And when I say unique, I mean unique between game objects of the same type. Like, for example, an emote and a class being a player class, not like a class in a programming language, could have the same slug, but two emotes could not have the same slug. So you'll notice that's a very common thing here, is that all my classes are going to extend definable. And if different classes want to share any sort of extra functionality between each other, they will use interfaces. So you'll see for something like a clickable picture, for example, is going to implement configurable. I'm trying to find one that would implement a lot of different things, like perhaps a label. Yeah, like this one is configurable, conditional, client updatable, and client definable. That's because this is a thing that implements functionality between 4 different types of things, and there's also all kinds of other classes that are also using this functionality. Using interfaces this way is my solution to not being able to have inheritance from multiple classes in TypeScript. I've gone very light on the inheritance with classes and very heavy on interfaces, since they're just so much more flexible. And you can see all these interfaces really do is just enforce that like methods exist for the most part. And then whenever I have a piece of code that I know wants to interact with all client definables, I'm just going to go ahead and fetch all the lists of all the classes that I know for a fact extend this. And the type system is going to, of course, always enforce that I'm not, trying to call toDefinition on a thing that does not extend client definable. Taking a step back here, going back into our run function, I hope I've provided a decent overview of how defining the game objects in this engine works. We generate our HTML file. I am using a template this time around. I am using a mustache template. This is a library that I think is in a lot of different languages. But the reason that I'm doing this is because I want to be able to server-side render some things in the HTML file that are going to be defined on the server. For example, any game data that we want the client to have immediately and we don't want to be sort of like lazily sent, I just throw it in data attributes parsed as JSON. So what I do in my generate HTML is I fill in all of these variables with the game data and I populate them in the template. Fairly standard templating. You can see what I was talking about here earlier, like for example, this client definable interface. I just fetch every single instance of a class that implements client definable, and then I add them to my list of game data for the clients. Right here, we form our database connection. We are using Sequelize ORM, same that I used for the previous engine. We create the auth strategy. This is for user authentication. This is using Passport, HTTP-based authentication, the Express. Fairly standard as well for a Node.js Express application. We create all of our HTTP routes and all of our WebSocket routes. As I mentioned before, HTTP is used for authentication. It's also used for registration. It's used for hosting the game's scripts and style sheets and assets. We use WebSockets for pretty much any sort of game communication. We create a WebSocket connection for each player. We have different handlers for pretty much any sort of input interaction, such as like a mouse down or a mouse up, or losing focus on the canvas, WebSocket disconnection, these types of things, and we have all kinds of custom handlers. I won't go through all of them, so that would be super tedious. And then after all of this, we go ahead and listen on whatever port we have defined for what am I saying? we start listening for HTTP requests here. And then we set up our update loop. We use a simple set interval. I define my ticks per second in a separate file, and on this interval we do update. Inside of updates, there's a few different things happening right here. There's some updating player state, such as movement. Movement is something that's handled in this loop here. Aside from movement, though, there aren't currently any other features that are making use of this update loop at the moment, aside from saving your save file and sending out updates to the client. Sending out state updates to the clients. That's the high-level description of this one. I think that'll probably conclude our look at the code for today. I know I didn't go super deep into how any of these features work, but I really do feel like each one of these features, like for example, a movement system or partying system and all this, these could really be their own videos. So if you do really want to hear about one of these things in particular, please let me know. I would definitely be down to, but I think for the sake of this video, probably just that super high-level run-through of how things are set up is probably about all we need. I think I'll go ahead and leave it there for today's status updates. That's about the best short summary I can give of what I've done with this new engine over the past month. I'm super happy about the pace of this project so far. Just like thinking about how fast I've cruised through some of these features compared to my last engine that I built is actually such an insane improvement. And yeah, really hopeful for the next few months of progress on this. I'll definitely keep posting status updates and things. Thank you so much, everybody who watched the video today, and if you like what you see here, be sure to like and subscribe, and if you have any feedback or anything, feel free to leave a comment. If you're interested in watching me work on this game engine live, you can head over to my Twitch page, twitch.tv/RetroMMO. It's in the description as well. And thanks so much, guys. One more thing before I go, I gotta give a big shout out to the sponsor of this video, Covalence. Covalence is a full-stack web development bootcamp, and it is actually the school that I attended. Covalence's goal is to bring you from zero programming experience to a career-ready software developer, and that is exactly what they've done for me. If you're interested in learning web development, I highly recommend that you check them out. Links in the description. So once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.